talk about the origin of blockchain, I'll talk about the origin of actually how I got into the business, which is like 2011. I am.
How old are you, Rik?
Not that old. I'm old, but not that old. And I was running a think tank, actually the country's first think tank on the world's first think tank, digital currencies called Mint Combine. And we were looking at how to make currencies in different modalities. And I ran into a young programmer named Joe Fischella. Some of you may have heard of. He's kind of an unknown, unsung hero in this space. But Joe, 20-something-year-old kid, and he had come up with what they call colored coins. And colored coins turned out to be the programmable essence of a block. So how we got here was mining. I'll go back to that, sorry. Mining occurs, and you hear Bitcoin mining. That was the original sort of chain of blocks. So mining is accomplished in the Bitcoin sense for a decentralized currency when computers essentially point a program at a certain algorithm and solve a mathematical riddle. When they solve that mathematical riddle, they are awarded a block. That block contains a certain amount of Bitcoin, in the case of Bitcoin. And so when you have miners competing for to solve those mathematical riddles all over the world, the thousands of miners competing for blocks, storing more and more hashing power, more and more energy, electricity, CPU cycles into that, they get awarded these blocks. And so when you have enough miners who are getting all these blocks in succession, it's a chain of blocks called a blockchain. And that blockchain is a record of all of the transactions and all of the awards given to any particular miner, or if you spend it from any person or organization to any other person or organization. And essentially, the strength of that is it's immutable code. It cannot be changed. It's military-grade cryptology. I don't know how many people know that the Satoshi white paper is actually built on military-grade cryptology. That is the essence of blockchain. So blockchains are almost impermeable until quantum computing comes along and smash everything. But right now, it's an indelible, immutable record of transactions, so it solves a double spend problem. So I can only send you a Bitcoin, and I can't send it to her, right? Just like I give you $1, I can't give her the same dollar. So, but in other digital currencies prior, like eCash and all these other kinds of things, people were gaming it, so I can just send you an e-coin, and I can send her the same e-coin, and so it was a mess and it didn't work. So Bitcoin solved essentially the 401 dilemma. The 401 page is the page on the internet that was set aside by ICON for native digital currency, which never got used because no one ever got it right. So Bitcoin essentially came in and solved that kind of problem. Now, again, the blockchain is, when Joe Fischella taught us several years ago, a few years ago, was that you could program these blocks. And you could program them to do certain things, if-then propositions, and just write sort of things that couldn't be extricated from them because it's indelible and immutable. And then we said, oh wow, so if you can program those blocks to hold information, then we can program it to do almost anything. And the blockchain was literally born by that idea, the enterprise blockchain as we know it. So we said, well, why don't we program it to do escrow? We program it to do this or that. And this whole thing sort of mushroomed out of that initial movement that happened here in New York City by a couple of kids who found that they could write Valentine's Day. The first use of color coins in the blockchain and immutable messages was Valentine's Day, 2013, when Joe Fischella set up a little company that took a Bitcoin, little pieces of Bitcoin, to put a Valentine's Day message in a blockchain for your significant other, because that couldn't be erased. That was the first actual blockchain application in the world. And it was pretty momentous for us, so now it's all this. Yeah.
So can I ask any of you to give me like one of those coins on the Valentine's Day? I really welcome that. I'm open for that.
I'm going to get trail now, but it was kind of interesting to move to it.
All right, well, thank you, Rik. I mean, when we talk about Bitcoin, because we just spent a good chunk of time talking about the Bitcoin, I think another sort of question that we all have is, what is that ICO thing, ITO thing that we see, right? Joel, what is happening in that ICO arena today? And where is that going? I know that there are a lot of interesting issuing happening in the field.
Not much, really.
Not much?
By the way, there is a basket of Bitcoins back there next to the beer and wine. If you haven't taken some, please do before you leave tonight.
I all of a sudden don't feel so, special after you give me the first bag.
So, one aspect, and it's important when we talk about blockchain to say this is one aspect of blockchain, because by all means, there are all kinds of things going in the blockchain industry we'll talk about that have nothing to do with these so-called ICOs, which stand for initial coin offerings, or ITOs, initial token offerings, which some people look at as being comparable to an IPO. But in any event, loosely speaking, one of the ways that we've seen blockchain applications roll out is through these so-called ICOs, which become a means of raising capital. So if you've got this great idea and you say, I'm going to do whatever it is, I'm going to reinvent the management of dog and cat walking, and I'm going to do it through blockchain technology, but I need money to launch my business. One of the things people do is they create their own version of a proprietary type of cryptocurrency. So not Bitcoin, not Ether, but a so-called token or application or utility token that has characteristics of those other types of cryptocurrency, but are intended to be a utility or a function that is unique to a certain product or process or platform or idea or software. And in any event, people will come along and say, all right, I have this great idea, I want to create this blockchain application, I need money for it. And so one of the ways that they can raise money is by issuing one of these tokens, and they bring in capital and then use that capital to continue to develop their business. One of the challenges or questions around these ICOs are, what are they really? They're a way to bring in money, but are they securities? Are they the same type of traditional investments that we've seen for years? So if you buy one of these tokens, are you becoming an owner in a company? Are you getting the right to future profits, to future dividends? What exactly are these tokens? And that's the complicating question, because there is no easy answer. There's no clear answer. Tokens can be all kinds of things. Some of these tokens represent the right to have access to a platform, to access software, to access being able to engage in commerce in a closed community, to be able to participate in some way in some type of application, so that they give you the right and the ability to do things that you can't do unless you hold the token, the same way a membership interest gives you certain rights to access to a country club, or a ticket gives you the right to go to a football game. Other tokens do different things. Some of them are intended to be spent like real currency. A platform where you can go on that platform and pay for people to provide certain types of expertise. So if you're a consumer and you need specialized services from people, you can go on that platform and pay for that expertise by using a token. So you spend the token the same way you do any other type of currency. And yet there are other tokens, as I said, that look a lot like an ownership interest, where you take that token and you hold it, and the people behind the idea are going to go out and make a lot of money, and you're going to make money as part of that, especially because you can trade and sell that token on secondary exchanges, hopefully for more money than you paid it. So we've got all kinds of tokens that are flooding the market. Some of them make a lot of sense, a lot of them don't. Some of them are junk, some of them are probably borderline fraud, and there are a lot of great ideas and applications as well that people are legitimately using tokens for to raise funding. On a regulatory standpoint, right now the whole world is looking at tokens and trying to figure out what they are and how to regulate them. There's debate going on. Different countries are stepping in, some aggressively, some gingerly, and to try to put some oversight and control on the market. It's constantly changing. All I can tell you is that 6 months from now, the regulatory environment with respect to tokens will look nothing like it looks today.
I'm very simple-minded, so I say these things do pass the Howey test and they are security, but that's my own opinion, and nobody else's, so. All right, well, Well, I mean, so that's probably the most major way we know how blockchain applications are being utilized today. But for example, financial services, Lior, is looking into a lot of different applications. And because this is the future of blockchain, we would like to hear what the financial services industry, because guess what? We are in New York City, right? What the financial services industry is looking at, thinking about. If there are some applicable applications out there already, could you give us a little bit of examples and thoughts?
Sure. So first of all, I'll start by saying everything that I'm saying here is my own personal opinion here. It's not any official stand of any institution. Yeah, disclaimer. And that's actually it's part of the challenge on blockchain, which
We're recording this, right?
Everybody start quoting him right now on the social media.
And because the challenge here is that everyone is kind of waiting and seeing what other people are doing, and we've seen it when Goldman Sachs said they might start trading bitcoins. We've seen it when CME said they're starting to issue to enable trading in Bitcoin futures. So there is a lot of kind of like wait and see kind of an approach. The potential is pretty interesting, and I think so. When we talk about cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, like Ethereum, we're talking about something that's called permissionless blockchain. That is, this blockchain is public; everyone can participate in it. There is usually it will be a proof of work algorithm, a consensus mechanism. There are no special limitations, and there is a relatively anonymous. The participants are relatively anonymous. When we're talking about applications in the industry of the blockchain, we're talking about a different group of blockchains, different type of blockchain, which is called permissioned. That is a blockchain where you know who are the participants. It will usually work on a different consensus mechanism, and there might be a few tweaks to adjust it to the specific implementation. But you're still maintaining some of the key properties of the blockchain. And one of those key properties is the decentralized ledger. Now, just so you understand how big this concept is, or how big this potential, you can think about in the past when you bought something, when you, for example, went to iTunes and bought a song, you didn't really buy it. What you did do is you paid some money to Apple. Apple went into their centralized database, centralized ledger, made some sort of a comment next to your name that says that you have certain privileges around access to that specific song, and that was about it. In the world of the blockchain, there is this concept of decentralized ledger and a true way of transferring ownership and providing this concept of uniqueness. I can give you something that once I give it to you, no one else has it. And it doesn't depend on me noting it in my own database. And that specific, that concept, that idea is very, very powerful. And it's nothing, like we didn't really have something like that in the past. So, what is it useful for? That's kind of the million-dollar question. But I will say that a lot of the services in the financial services industry, let me start this in a different way. When I went into the financial services industry, I was very curious about the concept of money. What is money? And so far, and maybe based on my limited experience, money is basically a set of ledgers that are being synchronized. There is the central bank ledger, there are the institutional banks, there are the retail banks, and all of those ledgers are being synchronized one with each other. And ideally, this would have been a perfect process, and you wouldn't have everything would kind of be in sync. But in reality, it isn't. And there is a lot of effort synchronizing those ledgers. And there are special entities like, for example, central clearing houses, whose entire purpose is to be that central ledger and provide that service. And now, with the blockchain, all of a sudden, you have the possibility of doing that without needing this middleman, this depository, this central clearinghouse. And the most immediate impact is, of course, automation. But then we're opening, the discussion to maybe new processes, maybe new types of assets. All of those things are kind of like derivatives of this new, this new capability, and the things that come with it. And I think the concept of smart contracts was mentioned earlier. So smart contracts is those autonomous piece of codes that run on the blockchain. And nothing really runs on the blockchain, but it basically means it runs on each of those nodes. And you can assign certain functionality to those. So now, all of a sudden, and I think it was mentioned before, the functionality of escrow, you can delegate it to a smart contract. You don't necessarily have to have some sort of a party sitting in the middle between you and your counterparty. To just hold the funds and verify it, and you don't need, you have less, you can, there's a lot of automation you can do around it. It opens up a whole new set of possibilities. It also raises a whole new set of questions, and that's kind of what we're trying to figure out.
Also, the answering these questions part, we can all be involved to answer those questions, right? So come and participate. And while we're talking about the future application, Rik, you are based out of California, being involved in so many different blockchain initiatives. I have two-part questions. One is if you have seen, outside of financial services, if you have seen some interesting use of blockchain. And B, I'm actually one of those people who just sits there in the middle of the night and say, everybody says that this technology is pretty safe. There's gonna be a way I can hack it, right? I'm not gonna go and code to hack the system, but I actually came up with a couple different ways I can hack the system, spoke to a couple different people, and they actually verified my point. So, I'm not gonna tell you what it is. So, what are we doing in order to protect the technology? Is there any new development coming along?
Yes, that's a two-part question. So to answer the first part, I have to say this, and speaking of the philosophy of money and what money is, everyone here should read a book called The Philosophy of Money by Georg Simmel, who was contemporary of Freud's in the early 20th century. It's a 600-page book. You'll hate me for it, but you should read it if you really want to know what's happening today.
Who's the author?
Georg Simmel, George without the E, it's a German name, Georg Simmel. Simmel. Because we have a phrase at Agentic Group called the Internet of Value. And what the blockchain has allowed us to do is to tokenize a lot of processes, to create tokens that have a value corresponding directly to a lot of processes that are traditional and a lot that are emergent. So we see this Cambrian explosion of value around the world. In peer-to-peer sense, he said, you don't need banks, right? You don't need Apple anymore to trade music files. So we're actually going backwards in a step to barter-like situations where value for value is being traded without the money intermediary, which has been built traditionally on basically two things, societal value and exclusion or scarcity, keeping somebody out and keeping somebody in the money flow. Right? So you have almost 3 billion people who are unbanked or underbanked around the world, but they do have cell phones. Some of them have laptops. Even if you have a dumb phone, you can actually trade in digital currencies. So pretty soon, you're going to find this mad global rush into the creation of new value, new wealth in the world. And we don't know as a society, any of us, any human being, what that looks like. We're so used to sort of a cut and command hierarchical society where there's certain people have excluded other people on purpose to keep their value high and the rest low. All of a sudden, values equalized. What does that look like? I have no idea. But get ready for it, because that's exactly what's going to happen. So to understand what's happening, you have to take a look at not only the technology, not only the applications of blockchain, but the societal ramifications. And what that will mean for the disintermediation completely, and sometimes complete destruction of entire markets, right? So that being said, what can stop this? Well, yeah, the Bitcoin blockchain right now, yeah, I mean, the most vulnerable points are at the wallet. If you're crazy enough to have a browser-based wallet, you pretty much, deserve what you get, which is eventually getting hacked. It's even happened to me. I got hacked a few months ago. I forgot that my very first wallet from 2012 was online. I had a couple of Bitcoins in it. Somebody called me and said, "Oh yeah, I got your Bitcoins. Want to pay me for it?" I said, "No, keep it. I don't care." So I keep everything offline. So
It's a badge of honor, right,
you want
Rik?
that? Actually, kind of, yeah. So what we're working with on right now in Canada is quantum blockchain. So we realize that quantum computing is right around the corner, and if you throw a quantum computer with a hack on the blockchain right now, to smash it right to bits. So we realize we have to do something to mitigate against that potential threat, that future threat, which is not potential, it's real when it happens. So we're working on quantum blockchains. We are working on lots of resistance factors within the code, and hopefully we'll be successful in that and be able to build this sort of bridge to inclusion that is the vision that we see.
Meanwhile, mad scientists like myself will continue thinking about how to hack this system. So, well, I mean, with the new technologies and all of this exciting development, of course, comes, unfortunately, the boring side. Sorry, Rik. Sorry. It's called regulations, policy, whatnot. So we know that there are a lot of regulators and policymakers looking into this technology, trying to figure out what to do. I mean, you touched upon a little bit earlier how to classify the cryptocurrency side of this. But blockchain itself, who can develop applications, who can actually use where, those things are currently looking at as well, right, Rik? As well as writing a new policy on them. So sorry, Joel. Sorry about that. Erase that part from the recording, please. Thank you. Edit. I was calling Joel with, while my mouth was saying Rik. Joel, so if you can share with us a little bit about, what is going on the regulations front, that'd be great, so that people can start thinking about how to balance the exciting stories with the actual sort of things that we need to think about.
When you think about blockchain, I think the starting point is that blockchain does not recognize jurisdictional boundaries. Rik talked about how blockchain empowers people and allows people to come together from all parts of the world. And so once you've got an infrastructure that doesn't care about where you're located, it completely takes the way we think about regulation and turns it upside down. We went through this a little bit 15 years ago with the internet because that had some similarities. People were looking at this new cyber world and saying, well, this too doesn't respect regulation, and how do we regulate, and how do we organize ourselves on a jurisdictional or global or societal way with these new technologies. And so we're once again looking at those same issues with blockchain. And if we look at how internet evolved, we're seeing some of the same things happen again. It's a combination of different countries looking at it, some taking aggressive approaches. China, for example, saying, at least for the time being, we don't want people to be able to distribute their tokens in our jurisdiction, so no ICOs for now in China. We've got other countries that take a completely different view. The UK created what's called a sandbox, which basically created a framework by which different players could come and try out new technologies in the blockchain space with in effect, a go home or bypass jail for free card, so that you could try these things without having to worry about whether or not you're violating existing regulatory regimes. Other countries are taking somewhat of a wait and see approach, like the SEC in the US. The SEC has dipped its toe in the water providing some guidance, but for the most part has tried to exercise restraint in not shutting down the system. But where that leads us are a couple things that are happening. One is that there are a lot of different outfits on a voluntary basis where people are coming together to try to create best practices, best standards, Different organizations, like in New York, we've got the Wall Street BlockChain Alliance, which is trying to, right now, we're just about actually going to be announcing tomorrow some best practice approaches for ICOs that will be announced at another event, unfortunately not this one tonight, but another event tomorrow. There are organizations like the Digital Chamber of Commerce in Washington, the Global Blockchain Business Council, that are bringing together people in the industry and private sector side and governments to try to create market-based standards and hopefully, in effect, allow the world to come together with best practices and approaches before we get draconian government regulation that comes in and shuts down things on a blanket basis. But at the same time, things are happening so quickly and evolving so quickly, governments are becoming increasingly nervous, and we may see some governments stepping in and imposing regulatory requirements, assuming they can, before these private initiatives take hold. The other aspect about what's going on in this space is that people are trying to distinguish between two different concepts. One is blockchain simply a new way to do something that already exists? In other words, looking at the securities example, we have all kinds of laws and regulations governing securities. If we're simply using the blockchain to distribute securities, do we need a new set of laws, or can we take our existing laws and apply them, or slightly tweak them to make them work? Or are there things that are sufficiently unique within the blockchain space that are beyond the existing regulatory regimes that we have in place, where we really do have to come together and creatively think about new ways to regulate our interactions and relationships? So right now, part of the debate going on is figuring out the distinction between what truly is new within blockchain that doesn't have an existing regulatory regime where we perhaps need something, and what is simply a new means or medium of doing something that already exists, where we don't need to reinvent and re-regulate something where the existing regulatory regime, perhaps with minor changes, already works. So those are the debates, those are the things that are going to be continuing to happen over the next months and years, and the only thing I would say is that it's going to continue to change very, very fast.
Oh, again, and I will say this passes the Harumi test, at least the cryptocurrency, and this is security, so we can probably use the existing regulations and keep the government at bay. That's the stance I will remain. That said, we know that we can't just rely on my word to use this technology in finance and hope that it's going to adopt. So, Lior, I mean, as you develop, as you think through the strategy of how you can use this and think about the applications, financial services being one of the most highly regulated industry as is already, and we don't know what the government is going to do 1 year from now, 5 years from now. How do you work so that people would adopt if you were to actually create really brilliant technology? And then also, performance is an issue today. Is that something that your bank or industry generally is looking into?
Right, so, the key question was why blockchain? It's cool, but that cool is not good enough of a reason. Honestly, you guys will not probably even know you're using a blockchain-based service. So, for example, if I can offer you a security, and that's the standard US Treasury security, but it's trading on top of, or it's being settled and transferred based on a blockchain infrastructure. So it's faster, the fees are much lower because you don't need to do reconciliation. There's much less interaction. Is it the same product? And I will say, in my opinion, it's not. So it enables me to offer you new types of products that will be cheaper and more attractive for the investor or for the clients. Now, personally, I also think that what's very interesting when you look at blockchain is that it removes a lot of those obstacles that you've mentioned before. And yes, in the financial services industries, those obstacles are part of the strategy. Who can be an investor? Who can use specific assets or specific products? And one of the things that we're seeing, for example, in the ICOs is that it's all of a sudden it's a new. You don't have to be, or at least you didn't have to be, an accredited investor to invest in a startup, which is relatively new.
Maybe.
Exactly, maybe.
Very, very old.
So it does open up new opportunity for new types of products, for new types of services, and the key question, is it worth our while? Should we use blockchain for that and for for that specific use case? And the answer is it's very hard to tell initially. Blockchain is not a silver bullet. Things don't become better just because you throw blockchain into them. Blockchain has a lot of disadvantages. It's very resource intensive. You can achieve a lot of the benefits of the blockchain using very traditional, very common technologies that already have been in existence for enough time and are much more mature. But it does give us a certain set of interesting possibilities. The industry is looking into that. We're trying to figure out. Eventually, whatever we do will have to be able to stand on its own. You wouldn't buy it because it's on the blockchain. You would use it because it's cheaper. You would use it because it's better. Now, I will say though that, and there is a research by I think Accenture. They did an analysis on kind of like the structure of investment bank and how much cost reduction you will get from using blockchain. And there are areas where the cost reduction gets to 40, 50, 60%. And in those situations, you can't avoid recalling there's a famous saying by Jeff Bezos where you only have to be 10% better to be 10 times bigger. And our industry is very dynamic and it's very fast moving. So if you can offer something that is 20 or 30% better, it's not really something that people can compete with you. It gives you a very strong advantage. And you as the financial institution need to think about it. So it puts you in this dilemma of when should you kind of make that investment, when should you make that move. And this is a discussion that's been going on. That's kind of, but there's no clear answer for that. But it is, when we're looking on the potential, I'm seeing, there is a great report both by Rik and the interim report for the SWIFT GPI initiative, and both of them, if you look, for example, on cost of international payments, Rik is talking about 60% reduction, SWIFT is talking about 90 to 95%, and that's kind of like the trend. So there's definitely a potential.
Okay, so we've been talking for like 40-45 minutes. So as I promised, I would like to keep a little extra time for Q&A today. So I'm moving on to that segment of this panel. But I always like to finish my panel with one quick yes or no question. And today's question is going to be, and remember, we already put the disclaimer out there saying that this is just an opinion. Nobody's going to be quoting on that. Nobody's going to be getting quoted on this one. So, in the next 12 months, do you think the Bitcoin block is going to settle under 5 minutes?
No.
That's what happens with Bitcoin block. Never settle.
So his answer is no.
Well, as a lawyer, I should say it depends.
Disclaimer. Disclaimer.
I say no.
Okay.
But can I add just one thing, though? It doesn't mean that you won't have, oops, there you go. Someone in Worcester does not want me to say this. It doesn't mean you won't have platforms and other cryptocurrencies that will sell.
No, that I agree.
Okay,
Yeah.
Bitcoin itself is a very messy code. So we actually don't want to. Look, in my own opinion, Bitcoin can live or die. I really don't care. I don't care when it's at today, I don't care when it's at tomorrow. It's a multiplicity of currencies we're talking about. We're going back to the past in many ways. America itself, before the Civil War, had over 10,000 different currencies that were in use at any given point in time. The greenback is simply a debt instrument to pay the North for winning the Civil War. What we're doing now is we're expanding that concept and turbocharging it over the internet. So we're going to have thousands of currencies, hundreds of thousands perhaps, when we are all a little older. But that will be the future. So banks have to configure themselves for that reality, and may be really good for shipping and building buildings, but may not be good for regular transactions. So we're gonna find all this out as we move ahead. Anyway.
No, thank you for that. Okay, Rob, in the back.
Could you describe what the process is of doing an ICO, and what is required legally from the standpoint of, do you need a document, do you need disclosure, what do you need, what are actually the steps that you would go through, Rik, and all the other, and the other folks?
I've already spoken.
What are the actual steps? Yes, and please start with the legal part. Steps you need to go through if you were going to personally do an ICO on some subject.
Well, so there are all kinds of variables. What country do you want to sell your token in?
United States.
So if you're talking about including the U.S. and U.S. buyers, then your threshold question is this token, this thing I'm creating, is it a security? If it is, then I either have to sell it on a registered basis, the same as any other security, or figure out a way to distribute it as an exempt security on a private placement basis. So if you look at this token and you say these features of my token are such that it's going to give people some type of ownership interest or some type of profit right or some type of return on their investment that looks a lot like a security, then either I have to change my token or I'm going to have to treat it the same way I would sell any other security and do a prospectus, follow all the private placement regulations and limit who the buyers are to accredited investors or to qualified purchasers, and put in place holding periods before people can resell those tokens.
Let's say it's a privilege to have lunch with me.
All right. So let's talk about then an access token, a token that gives you the ability to go through the door, to become a member, to have access to something, including lunch with a special person. So now we look at that token and we start to say, well, this token gives you rights, it gives you some benefits, it gives you something that's unique that you can only have if you own the token, but at the same time, this token doesn't look like a security. It's not an ownership interest in a company. It's not giving me the right to future profit. It's not giving me the right to dividends. So if it truly is not a security, then in theory, I can sell it however I want to sell it. In other words, for the most part, it's non-regulated. Now the but is that if you are engaged in crazy or fraudulent activities, regulators will do their best to try to figure out a way to assert jurisdiction over you anyway. So on that basis, there have already been, to a certain extent, best practices that the market is quickly coalescing around, including preparing some type of disclosure document that may not be as wholesome as a security disclosure document, but a document that at least describes what the token does, why it's being sold, how the proceeds are going to be used from the sale, what the risks are in acquiring that token, and gives you some disclosures that start to look a little bit like a securities document. And there are also best practices being formed around how you distribute that token, including applying some type of know your customer or money laundering analysis, the same that people would do in other types of financial transactions in order to keep regulators away and alleviate the concern that this may be nothing more than an exercise to launder money. So those types of voluntary, so to speak, best practices start to look a little bit in ways like issuing a security, although at the same time, as long as your token truly is not a security, you can distribute it through a crowd sale type of approach without having to go through all of those regulatory requirements.
And then we had a question.
Any other
As
comments?
part of
from
his,
the other?
because that's a fulsome answer, and Joel knows what he's talking about. We work with him all the time. And the other parts that you're going to need, of course, are, let's say it's not a private placement document, but say it's a white paper that people hear about all the time. So this is really a document, usually a white paper, like in its traditional sense, is explaining is something that is sort of, it could happen in the future, right? Or here is a guess about the future. We could build this, and that's how it really started. There are different kinds of investors in this space. There are the crypto kids who invest amongst themselves, which is why you see these crazy valuations that are put forth by newly minted Bitcoin millionaires. And then we're entering now a phase where adults are in the room. And people are saying, okay, let's take some established businesses or funds like you and I work on, and let's tokenize them and make them more accessible to the public. Sometimes we're finding out that those are more securitized, applications. Then there are other kinds of applications that really there aren't access and utility based. So the white papers are getting less Byzantine and more realistic. There will be a shakeout in 2018. A lot of fraud will actually be exposed. A lot of investors will come into the space who aren't crypto-based, who will actually be putting hard fiat down on applications going to demand more protections. So we're going to see more of that. And also there's the straight sort of access that looks a lot more like loyalty points. And there's a strong lobby of the loyalty business in the US that is well prepared or ready to address that, and that's not a security. So there are lots of things going on that are moving the entire space forward in relatively different ways. So the answer to that, based on what Joel just said and based on what I just told you, is the one thing they all have in common is relentless marketing. Is that you really have to be prepared to throw your entire, you have to have a good marketing team, you have to have good founders like you do with any startup, you have to have credible people, and you have to have a team of advisors who understands the technology part and the business part. If you don't have that, if you have just, and I don't mean any disrespect by this, but let's say, some people who are working the food and beverage, here as your advisors, well, it better doggone well be a catering company that you're trying to tokenize, because if it isn't, then there's no credibility in that space. And a lot of this stuff is going to shake out in the next 6-7 months.
Just a quick follow-up on that point. Where do you see in the Gartner's hype cycle, where we're at the peak of the hype cycle and we're going to trough of disillusionment?
We're in the peak of the ICO hype cycle. I mean, the word blockchain itself is, do you open up your laptop, look at your browser, and call it a TCP/IP window? No, blockchain's a hype word, right? Just like Lior was saying. That word goes away in a year or two. It doesn't matter. It's the applications underlying that. Does it make your life better? Does it make your life easier? Does it give you more money? Does it give you more savings? Those are always the value propositions of any technologies. So the hype cycle is still in full gear. It will continue through 2018 for sure. And I think we'll start to see a leveling off in 19. We'll start to see people saying, "Oh yeah, well, blockchain is cool, but what's in it for me?" Right? And that's the inflection point that you're talking about. We're still in the hype cycle.
Where do you see, right now it seems like these three tokens, right? And we're trying to deem them as utility of security, and security perhaps fraud, it could pass now test. What about the next wave, like the security tokens that are just designated security token, perhaps T0 and Overstock?
Yeah.
Is that possibly a bigger wave than the utility tokens that have raised?
That's yours. He's on the front line.
What is the question?
The question is, we talked about some of these tokens being utility tokens, some being securities. Are we going to see an evolution and maybe move towards more, everybody adapting some type of security type of token and moving to a more regulated framework? And I think that you've got two competing issues that are going on. One is that there is a segment of the market that wants those greater levels of protection, those greater levels of disclosures, particularly financial disclosure of the nature that we see when we invest in traditional capital markets. We know that when we're buying stock or bonds, that there's a real company there. That company has ongoing financial reporting obligations. There's management oversight. There are legal requirements that a board of directors has to comply with. We have none of that in a lot of these token issuances. So there's a segment of the market that is pushing for that. But the flip side is that one of the things that people love about tokens are the ability to be able to trade them. So this instant liquidity, so to speak, that you have with tokens that you don't have with traditional securities. And so that is the flip side. So if we go towards that more regulated environment, we start to potentially lose that liquidity, and you've got a big segment of the market that does not want that at any cost.
There are precedents all around us, and there has to be some sort of, and I'm not a lawyer, but I can play one on the blockchain, but I listen to him a lot, but I know, we're all gonna go to jail. I'm only kidding. We're all gonna stay out of jail.
Make sure you take your Bitcoin before you.
What was I saying? So the upshot is that there's precedent everywhere. I mentioned the loyalty lobby earlier. I mean, Microsoft, when you buy Office, right? You get essentially an access token. That code is your access token. You can call it that legitimately because the token is only code. And you plug it in and you enter and you're able to use your Microsoft, bloated bloatware. And then, sorry, anyone here work for Microsoft? I don't apologize, it's bloatware. But I'm an open source guy. I would say that you have that precedent as well. So legally, Microsoft says you can't, give this to anyone. But people do it all the time, and it's not a tradable asset. But it easily could be in the future, right? You can actually parse out time on your Microsoft, program to other people doing Word documents or whatever. It's totally possible in a peer-to-peer environment. So all these kinds of things can happen, and the precedent is there in many cases. The Howey precedent is there, the loyalty precedent is there, utility precedent is there, access precedent is there. So all these things are going to have to come together and find new ways to play in the same playground. And that's going to be a real challenge. And sort of the beauty of this is some other hybrid, sort of special way that we deal with these moving forward.
We'll take 2 more questions, and then I think I saw you raise you have to speak loud or come front and use one microphone.
That's fine, yeah, I can speak loud. I have a few questions, 2 of them specific, 2 of them a little more broad. Tokens were mentioned a few times. On CoinMarketCap, there's a coins and also tokens. Would you be able to describe what the difference between tokens and coins? To follow up on this question, there's a coin that is Ripple, and Ripple is actually listed as a coin, but it looks like it's a token. So the question is, why is it listed as a coin? And which actually it's very centralized because the company actually owns the token, that coin. And where do you see the future for Ripple, since it recently was adopted by American Express and Santander Bank? And 2 broad questions.
No. We can't even remember the first question.
The banker needs to answer Ripple question, but I can tell you why they listed it as a coin. Because in 2013, Ripple was almost out of money. So what they did is they actually took their tokens and they sold them on the open market. That's why Ripple was listed as a coin. Okay, so next.
Right, so the first question, the question was what's the difference between coins and tokens? Well, usually you would refer to something as a cryptocurrency if it has its own blockchain. So if you're thinking about Litecoin, Bitcoin, Ethereum, they're all different software. And by the way, Ripple is also their own blockchain. Now, tokens is, if you think about Ethereum, so Ethereum is a cryptocurrency, but then you're creating tokens on top of the Ethereum network. So but you're using the existing infrastructure, you're not creating anything new. That's kind of, but that's the interesting thing, right? I mean, so when you think about blockchain, keep in mind, it didn't originate from some research in some, by some institution or some university, but it came together through this community, and everyone came with their own, with their own definitions and their own concepts, and there's like this whole debate of, if there is no unit of value, is it still blockchain? I don't know, but that's the point. Some people will be very, aggressive on that, and different, if you don't have that, not a blockchain. Other people, including myself, still consider that a blockchain. But it's this very, there are very ambiguous definitions there. And I think that highlights an important part that I'm personally am a bit, it does bother me a little bit. When we are talking about this, when we are talking about market cap and Bitcoin, the value of Bitcoin and the value of Ethereum, the spike. We sometimes tend to forget that that technology is still evolving. We've seen the Bitcoin fork just a short while ago. We've seen an Ethereum fork. They're still figuring out the kinks, and it's very hard to make changes in something that has a market cap of $100 billion.
Just one more question. I think I saw the hand over here first, so go ahead. And remember, we have a reception after this, so they'll be available to answer some of your questions after the session as well. Go ahead.
So you mentioned quantum computers could render the Bitcoin cryptography obsolete. Is that a function of the proof of work mining algorithm? And is Litecoin and other cryptos also susceptible to the same thing, or is it because there's something else on regard to it?
Right, it's just brute force. I mean, it will.
Could you repeat the question? Can't hear it back here.
So he asked, why does quantum computing have the potential to tear apart blockchains as they live and breathe today? Because really, it's brute force attack like any other attack, right? So you're essentially getting into the algorithmic part of it, and this is from what I understand. I'm not a data scientist, but I will say that I work with a lot of them, and what they say is that what quantum computing will do is simply attack the algorithm itself, and anybody here can say, Rick, you're crazy, you know what you're talking about, because I kind of don't. But what I do know is that many professors, at least 15, 20 professors that I know, are working on this every day, and they've already essentially getting close to quantum computing. I've seen them render a blockchain completely ineffective in front of my face. So what they assure me is that if you build a blockchain with quantum mechanics behind it, then that's not going to happen 20, 25 years from now. I can get you, if you want to give me a card, I'll actually get you a better explanation.
Oh, that's great.
I was just informed from the sponsor that we can stay in the room a little bit longer than originally scheduled. So, a couple more questions. Okay, the gentleman in the back, or whichever you are.
Let me first answer the quantum computer question. Quantum computation is the notion of doing infinite parallelism. So you can compute an enormously large number of combinations at the same time in a fraction of a second, or in fact in no time, if you follow the Feynman logic. So think of a computer that can break your password in no time, because your password is nothing but a combination of characters, right? So the basis of the proof of work, which is the basis of the blockchain, is the notion that you search a space of polynomials, right? You are given a string, and you have an irreversible function, SHA-256 or SHA-512, and the function will produce an output in a very short amount of time. But you cannot go backwards. You cannot reverse the function. But in quantum computation, you can search the reverse space of that function extremely fast. So in fact, the proof of work will break down in blockchains, which is why quantum computing will break down blockchains.
Thank you for sending me an email.
Let me ask a question.
Better explained, yes.
It's very simple for technologists like myself, and I'm as guilty as anybody else, of promising things around the corner. The tech that I like is the tech that solves a problem today. So let me pose a problem to you. And this is for the panel. And let's see if blockchain solves this problem. Satoshi Nakamoto's paper from 2007, which talked about the idea of blockchain, did not say that they were going to remove everything from the man in the middle. There wasn't going to be a single entity, there were going to be a distributed set of computer programs that are in the middle. So when you do a blockchain Bitcoin transaction today, you are actually interacting with a set of computer programs. Now those computer programs are very simple in the Bitcoin world. Ethereum is talking about computer programs called smart contracts, which are much more complicated. And in fact, people like myself are talking about computer programs, smart contracts, which are very complicated. Well, Cathy O'Neill, down the street from here, has a book that says that nobody understands computer programs anymore. Human beings are at a point where we don't understand whether a computer program is right or wrong, whether it's a bug or a feature. So go back to 2007, we had these very simple little financial instruments called credit default swaps. If we have extremely complicated computer programs that nobody understands operating on a blockchain, which is an immutable data structure, what does that mean? It means that it's a data structure that you add to. You cannot go back and change it. You can only keep on adding to it. You don't have a delete function. You don't have a change function. It's like a friend of mine who wrote a 700-page thesis at MIT. Somebody asked his thesis supervisor, how could you let him pass with a 700-page thesis? He said, Tom doesn't know how the kill character works. So here's the issue. We're going to have a world of blockchain, which is an immutable data structure, and we're going to have financial instruments and smart contracts which are much more complicated than credit default swaps. Programs that we will not know whether they are wrong or if they are correct. How do we debug that system, and will it bring the world down?
I need to answer that, because we get the social issues a lot, and that's a pretty good question. I think we may get 3 different answers from 3 different panels. But in our opinion, that threat is real and persistent, and it's not only blockchain, but it's AI. And it's even more persistent with the combination of blockchain and AI, and genetics. So all of those questions can be asked of those 3 singularity technologies. I feel like I'm living in the singularity every day, like at the very beginning of not understanding what's over the horizon. I will say that I'm looking forward to quantum computing because you can go backwards with it, as you mentioned, and you can erase some mistakes, but some mistakes are going to be able to be erased. And I live with this every day, the notion of not only technological problems and mistakes, but financial and social and the fallout of that. So we want to approach this space very carefully. I think that, I would say, I know you do, and I've only spoken with Lior once, but hearing him today, I mean, everyone I know who's serious in this space takes this very seriously, what he just said. In totalitarian hands, blockchains are extremely dangerous, like AI, like genetics, extremely dangerous. So it's up to us. It's up to this community of people who want to understand what's going on. It's up to people walking in the street to be informed. It's up to us to try to inform them about the promises and the dangers of this space. Because we don't know as a human race how to go backwards either.
No, actually,
we don't know how to stop.
That's not true.
No, we don't know how to stop. No, but it's okay. We can move forward if we inform ourselves and if we decide that humanity is this is a tool for humanity and we're not the tool. If we make that distinction with ourselves, then we actually can control a lot of this.
I want to make the point that the laws of quantum mechanics are time invariant, which means that you will go forward or backwards in time. If I have a quantum computer, I, in principle, will be able to reconstruct the blockchain going backwards in time all the way to the first transaction done by Satoshi Nakamoto. These are laws of physics. I'm not right, and you're not wrong. These are laws of physics.
But you talked about credit default swaps, and since I used to be a credit derivatives lawyer, because of that financial crisis before the one that's coming now, that is actually, I'm really glad you brought that up, because credit default swaps were a means of being able to manage risk. They were a way to identify, slice, quantify, and take pieces of risk and move them from one party to another. So the problem that arose with credit default swaps was not the fact that they were bad in their ability to transfer and quantify and move that risk. It was that there was no transparency underlying how those credit default swaps were being used. When AIG was writing protection, in other words, entering into credit default swaps with counterparties saying, if that underlying bond or mortgage-backed security blows up, AIG will pay you and make you whole. The problem was AIG was writing credit default swaps at the same time to all kinds of players, and we didn't have a system that created the transparency to see the totality of the credit default swap exposure that AIG had. So
didn't have an
the
open
ease at which
ledger.
credit default swaps
No, but
allowed
that-
you to transfer risk also allowed you to create
But-
leverage
but-
very easily. And so if you look at that with blockchain, it is,
No.
the need is to look underneath and to understand those ramifications.
But that is exactly the point I'm trying to make. These computer programs, you cannot look inside them.
Yes, you can.
That is Cathy O'Neill's point.
You
They can't be
can make a
debugged.
blockchain as transparent or as opaque as you care to.
No, no, it's not the blockchain, it's the computer program running on top of the blockchain.
Oh, I just,
Okay,
so,
so go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry.
so I just want to say three things. The first one is, we've talked about using quantum computing to break the encryption of the blockchain. And you've mentioned earlier in the conversation, it's military-grade encryption. What do you guys think you're using when you're connecting with your bank account? Because that's exactly the same type of encryption, key pair encryption. So if I can break the encryption of the blockchain, trust me, I can break the encryption of your bank account. I can break into your bank account much earlier. So it's not a unique problem to the blockchain. It's something that will have a systemic effect. Second of all, and that's something that people often forget. By the way, if you guys have seen, there was someone just managed to crack like 27% of all LinkedIn accounts using some sort of algorithm. It's if no one hacks into your bank account, it's not because it's impossible. It's just because they don't care enough. The second thing is we've talked about chance of the risk in blockchain. I just want to remind people. We had the dot-com bubble. During the dot-com bubble, there was the crash raised something between $2 trillion, so now $2 to $3 trillion. So we're still talking 20 times more than if tomorrow Bitcoin would be worth nothing. So if all, we like to think about Bitcoin as like a huge thing, but honestly, even if the bubble explodes tomorrow, we've been through worse, much worse. And the last thing I want to say is there is a lot of fear out there. People are, there was this article about Google or Facebook both start developing their own language, and there is this fear of, software that, might be too complicated. That all might be, it is a risk, it's there, but I will say two things. First of all, blockchain enables us better controls. It enables us to do real-time risk assessment. It enables us to have much better visibility into what's going on in the trade. And in that sense, it is reducing the systemic risk and enabling us a better way to control it. And the second thing is that so when we are, you always have to ask yourself, is that something that we can stop? And when we look on the blockchain, one of the motivation, financial institutions don't like change. There is a reason we use infrastructure that's like dozens of years old. And it's not because they knew how to do things better those days. One of the key motivators for incumbent players, for big companies to go into blockchain is the promise, but also the fear that someone else will be there before they do. And that possibility is not limited to companies. So yes, you can stay outside and say, okay, I'm not I'm not going to be part of that system. You can even, as a country, you can say, okay, I'm burying every Bitcoin transactions out there.
It's like the fear of not using a cell phone, right? Trying to get off the grid.
It's you can't stop it. So yeah, you censor your internet, throw everyone in jail who's using Bitcoin. So what? There's still going to be billions of people out there using it. They'll move forward, you stay behind. So.
There's always, technology always is a double-edged sword. Fire cooks your hamburger, fire burns your house down. A sword, cut your meat, a sword, cut your head off. Is always in the pantheon of human innovation. Technology has both of those sides to it, and we can't get away from that. We only know how to move forward as human beings, so since that's the case, we take the good with the bad. And that's education, panels like this, thousands of other panels in the country happening right now on the same subject, are really important to become a part of, and to, you pick your battles. Do you want to do a blockchain for child trafficking? Yeah, I wouldn't, right? Some people might. Some people might. We'd have to break that one. That's just the human condition. It's a matter of how we use the tools that we have. And I think that I'm much more afraid of AI than I am of blockchain.
Yeah, I think a lot of just blockchain and just technology itself is not so much just the technology, but how we design it with people in mind.
People, they have to be tools for people, right?
What was that question?
Not weapons, tools.
I think that's probably a good point to kind of stop this panel. This was meant to be blocktail, so we are supposed to have fun at the end of the day. So we are going to pass this on to James Felon, who is going to be making a closing remark, and then we are off to the reception.
What constantly comes to mind as we talk here, and my thoughts changed as every question came to you all, is that Rik's last point is what's most important. I think if we're not designing policies and pushing forward a moral effort that honors the human being, then all these technologies can run amok. So, with that said, I myself like to think about all technologies as human extensions. Whether they're methodological or hardware or software, something a process we use, something that we can touch or something that we can't touch. These are all things that we are just deploying to make our condition better. And so with that said, I'm looking at the fear, and I feel like I heard some of it in the room as the panel went down their rabbit hole of blockchain. I think the purpose of this panel was to discuss the future of blockchain. I think that the future is less about cryptocurrencies and more about tokens. I didn't know. Okay, I'm realizing I recognize a lot more people in the room than I thought earlier. But so to that point, I think that we're moving towards a time where every single thing that is known, and then every single thing in the known world, will have some sort of token on it. We will just be transacting value as we know it. I mean, up until the point where we assign zeros and ones to every piece of matter. Until, of course, quantum mechanics and quantum computing takes on, and we lose our ability to just assign things some sort of binary measure. And it may be overly wonky, but so with that in mind, I would encourage everyone to think about the policy that we're pushing forward and how we honor other people's value. I think the most extraordinary thing about the financial markets are that they are this extreme example of human trust. When we look at the valuations of companies tomorrow, we're all saying that we agree to be here tomorrow, and we agree that things will be more valuable tomorrow than they are today, for the most part. Crashes happen, recessions happen, depressions even happen, etc. But we're all generally agreeing to be here in the same space and invest in the idea that we will be better tomorrow than we are today. And so, because of that...
Hey, can y'all have a little respect?
Yeah.
Somebody's speaking.
They're not gonna quiet down. They're already drinking. I was drinking a little bit before I got here. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of lay that out that we're not gonna move away from becoming a more integrated community. And so when we think about the way we use blockchain, we should really just see it as this opportunity to better transact our own value. And so when we started this trade association, we started around the idea that your personal data is this asset class. And so we kind of want to bring back whatever the future blockchain is to that notion that your personal data is an asset class that you should own outright. And because assigning you ownership of that value, whatever it is, it's not egalitarian at all. We are saying that some of you are more valuable than others. Like the man who was speaking at the back of the room apparently invented text messaging. I didn't know that until 5 minutes ago, but now I'm excited to meet him. He's at least a little bit more valuable to me than some of you in the room already. So part of that, as we try to better facilitate the transaction of our value, I want you all to consider how we build policy around these things and consider some of the things that have happened in the last week. So I think everyone knows that Bitcoin has risen to 9,500 plus earlier today. But some of the other things that have happened in the last week as regulators who directly affect our lives are terrified by the things that we talk about in these rooms. They're making actions on, so I'm not sure if you all are aware that the City Council of New York City just passed legislation to protect personal information. They've created sort of a half of the GDPR, for you all who are familiar with the GDPR here in the city of New York. And it's a framework, but you know, we don't have as much of the guts that that the European Union, the GDPR has. I just learned literally about 30 minutes ago that Eric Schneiderman, who, if you're not familiar, is our Attorney General, announced the SHIELD Act, and that's to protect New Yorkers from data breaches. It's also a framework to protect the sharing of your information outside of the state, which is still sort of light in the pants because it's not met with friendly policy in other states, and we also don't have a lot of other policy defining what data is yours and what is not. And last but certainly not least, I don't know if you all were watching Bloomberg earlier this morning, but they're talking about the fallout of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and who's in charge of the CFPB. But basically, the CFPB has established a new data aggregation principle which posts a de facto ownership right to your financial data, to you, the individual, not the institution. And it's one of the big arguments that's going to be happening at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau over the course of the next weeks and months as we figure out who runs that bureau, whether the bank owns your information outright or whether you own your information outright. And in my opinion, that is the most important economic issue of our times. You know, whether we're talking about blockchain or quantum computing or what have you, who gets to own the value that you contribute to the productivity of the world is absolutely the most important piece, because economists like me, we establish productivity as a measure of inputs. So if you own your input, then you have some sort of legal right over the productivity the productivity that happens because of you. And that's the core of what we're talking about here. I think what people are most scared about is that they'll be rendered obsolete. And so, anyway, I'll leave you with that. And my very last things, oh, you have a question? I know this is a question section, but if people are willing.
Yeah, I just have a question on, I guess your opinion, why there's no inclusion in the output of that productivity.
Well, so that's a really great question. So I own a stake in a few companies, right? I'm not at least I don't think, an evil person. I don't think that we have a good distribution mechanism for value. So I'm an engineer by trade, or at least I started as an engineer and kind of became an economist over time through more education and more work experience. But all engineers are trying to do usually is solve distribution problems. And so right now, your personal data is the most micro mechanism that we have to assign your value to better distribute your value. So to answer your question, the reason we can't better distribute the productivity is because we cannot justify where we're sending it to. And if you're a shrewd businessman or woman, you don't want to frivolously send value to where it might not belong. Making sense? Right. Oh, well. So anyway, so the reason this trade association, at least in our opinion, is is valuable and effective is because we look at every single business sector and we look at how they facilitate the transaction of value, whether it's healthcare or finance or advertising or telecoms and location-based things or internet of things, you name it. Everyone is just transacting value. I was just sitting with the CEO of the largest bank in Poland. It's called Bank Polski. And he told me that they don't see their financial institution as a bank anymore. He said they see it as an arbiter of trust. So if we get back to those core principles of why the markets even exist, it's that we're saying we trust. If I give Steve $1 and he gives $1 to Rick and Rick buys, this phone with it, we're all agreeing that that dollar is worth about the same amount of value over the course of some short time. And so, per that trust, what we need to do a better job of as business decision makers, as legislators, as litigators, is honoring the trust that people come into transactions with. And so, in my opinion, by giving you a sort of constitutional right to own your input to the productivity of the economy, I can better facilitate arguments that we will all have about who gets what, and they will be formidable, and real value will come out of that, and also real inclusion will come out of that. At least, that is my theoretical justification for this. Yeah, and so I want to wrap it up there. The very last thing is, we are kind of putting this into motion, so I'm moving slightly adjacent to the Trade Association, and Harumi is a genius, and she's moving forward, and Steve as well. I'm running for U.S. Congress here in New York, in the 13th District, to build out what the GDPR did in Europe, here in the United States, and also in the state of New York, to ensure that we can better distribute that ownership, so that the markets continue to exist in a robust way, and so that we can transact more value and scale over time. And so now let's drink beer and eat, I think there's some vegetables.